Hello and welcome to Fun with Fibers. My name is Vivian de Dunbar. I'm a citizen of the Kingdom of the East and the Kingdom of Acker. The original scope of this class was that to give you experience with spinning all different types of fibers, which obviously we can't do that, so I'm going to change it up a little bit and talk about how I approach spinning different fibers. The original research I did on for this class, I tried to do all different types of fibers that was used in medieval time periods from all different countries. I put that together and I had an arts and science project that I took and displayed, and then just recently I changed it up a little bit and it was published as a complete anachronist called A Medieval Fiber Study, and that is issue number 186, the fourth quarter of 2019. So I'll be referencing this. What I'm going to do in this video is show you my process. If you were going to be spinning for a specific project, if you had an extant piece that you were going to try and recreate, what you would do is you would try and find out where it was from and when it was from, and then you would research what tools, spindles, what type of fiber they had available to them. From today, we're just going to go through and not worry about that. We're going to just try and find the right tool for the fiber that we have. I'm not necessarily going to use a period spindle. They're not, electric, so they're not that modern. But we're not going to worry about period spindles today, and we're not going to worry about what a medieval person would have used with a certain fiber. We're just going to go through the fibers and how you approach dealing with each one of those. I encourage you all on your own to seek out new fibers. If you're in a fiber shop or you're at a fiber festival, pick up something you've never spun before. That, to me, from the beginning when I started spinning, was my greatest joy, was to seek out and find something I've never spun before. And, oh, they're so different. It's just so different, and it's such a different experience, and having to change up your spinning style and to really think critically about how to spin something really improves your spinning. Even when you go back to your favorite fiber, whatever it is, you find that you're just a little bit better because you've thought more about the process and how you go about spinning. Okay, so why don't I start off and show you the tools that I have available to me today. So for preparing the fiber, we have Whirl cards. So these are cards, and when you use these to prep your wool, you get your fiber in all different directions. It makes a very fluffy yarn after you spin it. So these are Whirl cards, and we'll show that. These are combs, which became very popular in the 14th century, and when you prep your fiber with this, you need to have a longer staple length of your fiber. You use this, and it puts all your fibers in a straight line, so it makes them much denser and shinier and kind of like a tougher yarn. This is a flicker, which is, I find, very useful if you're just doing little samples. You kind of just flick it out to spread out your fibers before you spin them. I use this a lot, especially if I'm just doing samples. If I don't have enough to use the cards. Gives you kind of the same effect as a carding would do. These are also cards, but they're for cotton. I also use them for Angora, which not necessarily period, but I do have some of that today. We're just going to play around with that a little bit. So the little teeth on this are finer and closer together. So you would use this for cotton and Angora, anything that's a really fine fiber. I have a nose to pin, which is really good. I'll show you. It helps you make a center pull ball. So if you're doing samples and you don't have a whole bunch of fiber, you can just spin out, make it a center pull ball, and then you can spin it together, and then you have your sample. This is a nitty knotty, so you can use this to make a skein of yarn, and this is a 1 yard size. So after you're done putting it on there, you count the strands and each one equals a yard. Here we'll go through some of the spindles that I have. These are Really love these. Turkish spindles, although we don't know that they're Turkish, and we certainly don't know that they're period, but I love spinning on them, because when you spin on them, it makes a center pole ball the way you wind it on. These are what we would call a bottom whirl, so the weight of the spindle is on the bottom. If you're a beginner spinner, I suggest starting with a bottom whirl. It's not the popular thing right now. Everybody likes to use a top whirl, but the bottom whirl spins more slowly, and it makes it easier for you to deal with it, especially if you're just starting out, and you use park and draft. This is how I learned, and I find it a little easier. It's also good if you're doing something heavy, because you can spin longer. If you're using a wool and it's thicker or it's stronger, you can spin for longer without having to unload it. So these are just two different types. Here I have some top whirls. So a top whirl spindle will spin faster. The thinner that you spin it, the more it has to twist. The thicker, the less it has to twist. So if you're doing something really thin, save yourself some grief and spin a little faster. This right now, I think this has cashmere on it, so that's fairly thin, and I was using this to spin some cashmere. Very modern spindle, Golding spindle, but I enjoy it. Okay, here I have some replica medieval spindles. This one has a metal whirl, and the wooden shaft has a little notch carved in it. You can't see that. This one has a clay whirl. This one also has a metal whirl. It's got a little bit of a thicker shaft. Also has a notch. So we'll play around with this a little bit. I can spin on these. They're not as great as the modern ones, but if you want to go period, and that's what you want to do, then definitely it's not too hard to find. Sometimes I bought the shaft separate from the spindle whirl. And then this is a supported spindle, and this is the bowl. So if you have a fiber that's too short or too fine to support its own weight by letting it hang, then you would use a supported spindle. And what's happening is it's got a very sharp point that's just resting in the bowl, and then this way you can spin, and then it doesn't break your fiber. So that's what I have for these. And I'll go just a little bit into the different fiber and where it comes from. I'm going to start with silk. So the silk, you may or may not know, comes from the silk cocoon. So the silkworm eats and eats and eats and eats, goes through its different stages of growth, and then it's ready to turn into a moth. So it puts itself in the little cocoon, and this is all one strand of silk, hundreds of meters long. So what you have to do is you have to put this in boiling water. Now, I don't know if you can hear that, but the dead worm is in there. These have been steamed. You let the moth come out, then what happens is then the strand is broken, and that's broken strands. You can spin that. If you just reel it out and you have reeled silk, then that gets woven that way. You don't actually spin it. I'm not going to do that. So we do spin it, and it's the broken strands from that. Sometimes modern, they're called piece silk because it doesn't kill the moth. And if you do sericulture, which is silk, you're going to need to have some moths, because the moths, all they do is lay eggs. They don't eat. They just lay eggs and die. You're going to need some eggs. Otherwise, you're not going to get silk the next time. And these are from China, different types of silk. There's some that are kind of like a golden color, and that comes from India, and they eat something different. This type of silk is, they would consider domesticated. They have the eggs on paper, they put it in the sun, the eggs hatch, somebody feeds them the mulberry leaves, that's all they eat, and then controls the temperature and the humidity and the growth. There are some types of wild silk that people have to go pull these out of the the bushes and stuff. So this is the kind from China. Here I have some silk. Silk is very long, even though these are broken strands that were reeled off. You can see the way you can tell how long your fibers are is just by taking it and pulling it out. See, that's super long. That's how long it is. Also, I didn't have a chance to do it. Before I spin silk, which is one of my favorite things to spin, I usually clean my hands with a scrub, with like a hand scrub, because every little callus or imperfection in my hand is going to catch the silk. Also, made sure I did file my nails because it'll catch on that as well. And as much as I love to spin silk, spinning it outside, if it's really windy, also difficult. It knots up so easily. And so we're inside and turn the air conditioner off so it wouldn't be too noisy. So we're gonna do some spinning, and let's do a top whirl. You can use a bottom whirl on the silk. For this, I'm gonna do it pretty fine. And what I'm gonna do, I don't know if you can see that, is instead of using a leader, I'm just gonna take this and fold it on the hook. I'm using a hook, not period. We're not worried about that today. You could also start by spinning it on your thigh and starting your leader that way, or you can use some modern yarn or yarn you've spun before and start that as your leader. Now, everyone has their preference for what they like to spin and how they like to spin. I love spinning silk. I was the second thing I learned to spin. I learned to spin wool and then I went right to silk. I just enjoy it so much. So pretty, it's like my go-to fiber. Not so good with the short fibers. My long draw sucks. And I've just kind of always done the inchworm that you learn when you first start spinning. But it works, and it comes out fine, so it doesn't matter. You know, as long as you're spinning for the end result or you're spinning for pleasure, you do what works for you. Again, this project is all about the fibers and what they used and where it came from. Silk was known all over the known world, but through traders. It was really only from China and India, and then was taken to different places. There's folklore that Justinian had people smuggle out eggs from the silkworm I've heard in turbans, in stabs of their stick, walking stick. So they did have it in Byzantine and then what became the Ottoman Empire. And then so they had it there, but silkworms weren't prevalent in Europe or in the northern hemisphere, so they only saw finished product of silk. They would see the finished things. They did know about it again from traders, so it was pretty rare and it was a big luxury. So again, if you're going to be doing a silk project, that's fine. Even if your persona is not from there, you have to come up with a reasonable reason why you would have silk. But if you're not doing it for a project and you're just doing it to experience it, then, just have a blast. I've been trying very hard to get some of the golden colored, I think it's a tussa silk, with no luck. And especially now, things are even harder to come by if it's coming out of country. So luckily I have tons and tons of fiber. I don't have to worry about buying any more, and I will not be bored. This pandemic could go on for months and months and months. Hopefully not, but I'd have plenty to spin because I have that much. Okay. So we only need to do a little bit. And really, I could be spinning this a lot more. Because I'm spinning it so fine, it could take a lot more twist. But we're just doing it for the sake of this now. I'm going to use the nose pin. It can be tricky, because remember how I said silk tangles, you have to be really careful when you put it into a center pole ball. And actually, I'm just going to spin the end a little more so that it doesn't get knotted up. Now, I tend to just, for my own, I always, unless there's an important reason why I wouldn't, I almost always spin clockwise when I'm spinning a single and then spin counterclockwise when I'm plying. Only because sometimes, like that cashmere that I showed you has been on that spindle for years, and I don't want to have to remember, did I spin that clockwise? Did I spin that counterclockwise? I know that I spin it clockwise. Okay, so now I'm going to put this on here and just make a really quick center pull ball. So this is very fine and not fuzzy at all, very slick, very shiny, and to me just a pleasure. When I spin, it's not just about the finished product, it's also about the experience. I love the experience of spinning. So I like, you know, I'm very mindful if, I might have made a, no, okay. Prove my point if I did make a knot. Okay. So now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie a knot. Just a quick little knot. Just so I can hang the spindle there. Again, I have the hook. Can be done without a hook, but for ease. Okay, now I'm going to untangle this a little bit. If I can, I might not be able to. Yeah. Alright, so I have a knot in there. That's because I'm going fast. I normally wouldn't do a center pull ball with silk. I usually spin it and then make a ball. One ball by hand. And then put it aside or leave it on the spindle. I have a couple of spindles like this, and I just leave it on the spindle to avoid what just happened. I have a nice big knot in there. But it's just a sample, so it's okay. And then I'm just going to go by feel. What I think is spun enough. And if you can see, let me pull this up a little bit, just how fast that's spinning. That's a top whirl. It spins super fast. Okay, so I think we're good. Probably overspun a little bit. Never hurt anybody. So there we go. Silk. Flax is a plant. It comes from this plant. So here's some dried flax. There's a little berries on there. There's the stalk. I was really surprised at just how thin these stalks are. And I have not myself gotten flax out of the fiber out of this plant. Someday I hope to do that myself. I've researched how it's done. It's a lot of work. And I mean, the amount of work that has to be done to get an ounce is got to be incredible. So it's a fiber. It's a plant fiber. Okay, how they get fiber out of the flax plant is what they do is they take this plant, they put it through a set of combs, almost like these combs, except there's more rows of them, and they beat it to get all the berries and stuff out of it. Then they have to do the retting. Break down the outer core in order to be able to get in to the fiber. So usually they do it either wet or dew. So they put it out on the plane, and dew retting is just letting it sit there, and in the morning the dew gets on and it kind of rots it out. Basically you're rotting it. And you need a lot of space and you need to have dew, and it takes a while, and they turn it over and it takes a long time. Or you can stick it in water and have moving water. So they would put it in a river or stream and that rots it out. You have to make sure it's not too rotted, because then your fiber will be garbage. So that takes a lot of time. They get it retted. It's enough that they can get the fiber out of it. Then they have to break it. So they take it, and that's called a break. It's a flax break. It's big. Usually it almost looks like a knife. Sometimes they use a mallet, depending on where they were, and they would break it up so that it would get the outside and the fiber away from the core. Then they do hackling, which is another set of combs, a little bit different from the original rippling, again, like that, and they, to get everything, all the outside material out, all the core apart from it, and then you're left with beautiful fiber that you can then spin. Flax is grown anywhere. You can grow it anywhere. There's no one place that we know it originated from. They use it all over Europe, all over everywhere. So it's one of those fibers, and it's absorbent, and it's cool. It's used a lot for linen, flax, for table linens, for bed sheets, for towels. Undergarments were almost always linen because it was absorbent. Linen and flax do not take dye well, so they didn't bother really dyeing it. Now, with synthetic dyes, we can get all kinds of colors with it. If you bleach it in the sun, it'll get lighter. The flax that I have here is not bleached, so it's kind of like a natural color. It's not what you would think of if you buy something that's linen. It's not soft at all. It kind of feels like straw. The more it gets washed, the more the excess stuff gets washed out of it, and it gets softer and softer. And so when you spin it, because it's kind of harsh, you want to wet it also, because see, I don't know if you can see. Let's get a little closer. It's kind of fuzzy. It looks fuzzy, right? When you wet it, it smooths it down when you're spinning. So if you want to get a nice, fine, smooth, you wet. You can either use water. You can use, they would use their mouths. They would use spit. Or I have read some places, and I haven't gotten the research for it, but I've heard some places mention that they would boil linseed oil and use that, and then it's also kind of ready to go for warp. It's then treated for weaving. So I'm going to play around with it. That's one of my upcoming arts and science projects, is to spin the different ways and see. So see what works for you. Now, this, as far as the length goes, we'll pull some up there. It's I would say medium, a little bit long. So you can really spin it depending on how you're spinning it. If you're spinning it thin, you can use a top whirl, you can use a bottom whirl. It's strong. It'll be stronger when it's wet, and definitely stronger when it's spun. So pretty much it's up to you and what you're comfortable with. I'll use a top whirl again. There are some pictures from, I think it's on an Egyptian tomb, where they were using top whirl spindles, and they had, in the picture, they had it going through a bowl of water. So like the flax would go through water, they had it all set up, so the person was spinning it and they had somebody behind it putting in the water. But I have a little thing of water right here, and we're going to do it that way and not get it in the cards. So because this was bought already prepared, I didn't need to do all that with getting it from there, but we don't need to comb it, we don't need to card it, it's already straight. Now, of course, if I was spinning this, I would have it on a distaff, but just for sample reasons, I'm not gonna bother with that. So I'm just gonna work a little bit of it here so I can get a leader. Now, this is very, very unlike silk, because it's not going to tangle on itself like the silk does. If it goes back on itself, I mean, you still want to be a little careful when you're spinning, but it's not anywhere near as difficult as the silk. So there we go, we're spinning it. And you can get this pretty thin, which is really nice. And I mean, if you have linen clothing, look at the fiber count. Look at how thin it's incredibly thin. I haven't tried to spin it that thin to make something like the weight of my veil is linen. To get it that thin, those fibers are really, really small. And a lot of times it was spun, it was woven as a single. It wasn't plied. It was a single. So it's strong enough that you can do that. Flax, it can be strong enough for that. So, I mean, that's pretty thin. It's kind of like what I was getting the silk at. Let's get a little stuff. And see, it doesn't have that fuzziness. Well, you probably can't see, but it doesn't have that fuzziness that has because I wet it. Alright. So, no problem putting this in a center pole ball. Especially, it's wet. I definitely recommend spinning some linen. It's a definite, I really didn't need to even put it on there. It's not that much. But I recommend getting some linen and trying it. It's really kind of easy and it's a lot of fun. And you can look up, if you want to use a distaff, look up how to do that and put it on a distaff. You can just use a stick. You don't need to get a fancy distaff. Or you can if you want. And then I'm applying it and voila. Yeah. Now I have linen. How cool is that? Next we have something very similar. Hemp. Hemp was very hard to research because there's not a lot of information. And mostly, especially because I live in the United States and it's illegal, it's hard to get information. There are records of it being used in China. They did have it in the United States and all over later on. Mostly it was used for rope because it resists rot with water, so it was really good for sails on a ship or for rope. It doesn't get as soft as linen does after washings, but it does soften up, but then also you don't have to spin it wet because it's not as hard and sharp. It's already whiter, but it's similar. I don't have the hemp plant. You can grow it if you have a license in the United States. And the hemp that's used for fiber is different than the hemp that's used for marijuana. It's a different species. Just like for flax, where you get the flax seeds that you eat, it's a different variety because then you want all the nutrients to be in the seed and not in the stalk. So the hemp that's for the fiber has a stronger and a thicker and a taller stalk. So you can't get high off of this. But it's illegal. They made it all illegal. I read in some places that was due to the cotton lobby. Took advantage of the situation with them making marijuana illegal, and they made hemp illegal because then it's in competition, because just like flax, it's really easy to grow hemp. It's not in a certain temperature, whereas cotton, when we talk about cotton, it's very specific places that it can be grown. Okay, so we're gonna spin this. It's just really the same as the linen, except you can spin it wet. I'm not going to. And this, just for the sake of argument, let's use the bottom whirl. And again, I'm going to start a leader on this one. It doesn't have to be. So I'm just rolling it. You can't see, I'm out of frame, but I'm just rolling it on my thigh. just to get a start. Because it's not very sticky to start off with. Like some wool and silk, it's very sticky right away. But this is, it's like I said, it's kind of almost feels like a grass. And you really need to spin it. But once it's spun up, it'll stay. Oops. That's why they call it a drop spindle. Not really. So actually what happened there is trying to spin it as thin as the flax, and it wasn't having it. So I have to adjust. I can probably get it thinner than this, and probably if it was wet I might be able to do it. But it just, it feels so much different. I mean, it still feels like straw, but it's right off the bat softer than flax. This is also real nice to spin. Especially now this is really uneven. Because I'm not really paying attention to what I'm spinning. I'm frantically trying to remember what to say. But that's why I encourage you to spin different things. And, you know, for whatever reason, I spun the flax much easier. Okay. I'm not even going to use the center pole. My samples are small enough that I don't need to put it on there. And then I'm just going to apply it. Yeah, this is really uneven, but that's okay. It's just samples. All right. I'm really bad at spinning cotton. Really bad at spinning cotton. But I still do it. And because I'm so bad at it, I try to do it. I've tried to work on it. I have two different kinds of cotton here. Most of the cotton that you see now is white. They want white cotton, and then you can dye it whatever color you want, right? But cotton does grow in colors. So here I got some nice brown. It also can grow in a beautiful like sage green. You can get a dark brown. So there's different colors, and this cotton is the kind that comes from the plant. Like what we're all used to seeing. This is like an old sample, so it's been a little beaten up. This still has the seeds in it. The seeds are kind of fuzzy. They're like a hairy seed, and they are really hard to get out of here. Which, you know, you learn in school that the cotton gin changed everything because it's so hard to get the seeds out of the cotton. And you don't want the seed to break because then you get the oil all in it. The cottonseed oil, you see that used all the time in potato chips are cooked in cottonseed oil. That'll ruin the cotton. So it's a bear to get these seeds out. This type of cotton is grown like on a bush, but there's some cotton that comes in trees, and that's in India, and not as popular. It was probably more popular medievally, possibly, but that's where you also get a lot of colors. But now this is kind of the kind that you see all the time. In here I go through more of the botanical species names, but I'm not going to get into that. We're not getting into that so much. So they would get the seeds out. They would bow it sometimes. They would have like a string. It looks like a bow, and pluck it, or you know, later on past period they use the cotton gin, or you can pluck it out. And then you can use the cards. But this was bought this way, so I don't have to do that. I'm going to spin the brown just because it's fun. Now, okay, this you'll see very short. Yep. Very, very short. So, and also not strong. It's not going to be able to hold its own weight. So I'm going to have to use a supported spindle. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm just going to take some of this. And you can laugh at me if you want. But that's alright. It's all for fun, right? Alright, so I'm just going to start it. And I'm just going to twist it a little bit. Get a leader. So we're not going to take the weight. This is not, the spindle is not weighing down the fiber. See, the way to do this is to do the long draw. I'm working on it though. Ooh, I'm working on it. So because it's so short, you can just do this. Alright, get in there, get in there. And then once you got it long enough, then you just, spin it till you got the amount of twists that you want. And if you're a new spinner, this can be overwhelming to move around from fiber to fiber. So, take it slow. But if you're more advanced, you'll get to the point where you can feel it in your pinch when it's got enough spin. So then the way you would do this is then you would put it on here. Just like a regular spindle. And then you just keep going. And I mean, if I really cared to, I got a lump there, I could take that out. Oof. Alright. Here's where it's all falling apart. So, cotton. You may be saying to yourself, is cotton period? It is some places. So, think of in the United States, where is it grown? It's grown in the South, right? Georgia, that area. So that whole swath, it's also grown in Mexico. There's a whole section of the earth all the way around where cotton is grown. It's the only place it could be grown. So it was grown in Africa, it was grown in India, it was grown in China, and the United States, North America. So that doesn't really figure into our period too much, but it was grown there. And it was known. They used it in Egypt. There's some Persian, I think it's Persian, cotton socks. So they had cotton. And just like silk, they would have cotton fabric. It was by traders, would bring it in. In India, they had a lot of cotton. And it, it was hot weather, so it's great hot weather fabric. And also then it was spread around, starting in the 8th century, with teachers of Islam would teach, they would go around teaching Islam, and they would tell the people that they needed to cover themselves up, but rather just say cover up, they would also teach the boys to weave it and the girls to spin it, and so they would teach about cotton and bring it around to them. Also, it was grown in what was called Anatolia, and then later, and so during the Crusades, Italy took over some of that, so Italy began manufacturing cotton, because it didn't make sense to have big bales of cotton that needed to be de-seeded and stuff to travel, so they just kind of processed it where it was grown, and then wove it, dyed it, did it all there, and then sold it as fabric. So Italy, in the later parts, had, I think it was like 15th century, they had some place where they could grow it, and they had a cotton economy, and Germany. And then when the Ottomans took over Anatolia, they closed it up, and then they had Ottoman cotton. And if you wanted to buy it, you had to buy the finished cotton. So if you're an Ottoman, cotton's period. If you're in India, if your persona is India, cotton's period. China, cotton's period. If your persona is, Muslim, you could argue that you had cotton. They certainly knew about it, but it was a real luxury fiber for the people in England and, Europe. So it was a luxury fabric that they knew about. They may or may not have understood that it came from a plant, but to say it's not period is not really. Now we're going to get into the wools. Going to get into our sheepies. And I have several different types of sheep that we're going to spin. And until it was all the rage when I started doing this, there was the breed studies were a big thing, and a lot of people were doing breed studies. And I wanted to take it a little step further. I'm like, well, I'm not just going to do sheep, I'm going to do flax and cotton and hemp and silk and everything that was available to our medieval friends. But I'm just so surprised how different from one breed of sheep to another. They're all kind of similar to us in the fact that most of them are what we would consider a primitive breed of sheep. We have, especially once you hit the 17th century, when they started doing genetic modifications to sheep, they changed everything. So our modern sheep are huge, and you want a meat sheep, it's got a lot of meat. It's a wool sheep, it's got a lot of wool. And then they bred them to have fine fleeces, but not too fine, and to be white, because that's what's good for manufacturing. Just like with cotton, it's better to have an all white fleece, and then you can dye whatever color you want. And everything is, it has to do with what's good for a manufacturing machine, and not what's good for us spinners. Now, so most of these sheep that we consider period sheep still exist in some way or another the way they did back then. For some reason, had some kind of characteristic that kept them from being changed. For some of them, they were just so remote, they were so far away that nobody took them and changed them with another sheep. For another reason, like Shetland sheep, they were fine, they didn't want to improve on it. Shetlands are gorgeous, and they have so many different colors available, the most colors of any different type of sheep. And funny enough, one of the most popular, but I don't have any here. I don't have any here today. But I've spun up everything that I have. But if you go to a fiber festival, you can find Shetland sheep. If you go online, you'll be able to find Shetland wool. So that's something that you can find readily. Then it's the color that just is so beautiful that's why they didn't change it. So I'll go through it. We're going to start our wool section with Jacob sheep. Jacob sheep are kind of interesting. They don't know where they come from. They don't know how far back they go. There's no evidence that they're actually from a medieval sheep that's come down. The reason that I consider them to be a period breed is because they're a recreation breed. They took the sheep and they tried to breed it back towards the standard of, they have a picture from some Syrian pottery from, I think it's the Bronze Age. So they tried to make it look like that sheep. So I consider it a recreation breed. It's kind of what the SCA is all about. So, and I love this sheep. The females can have 2 to 4 or 6 horns. Usually they don't have 6. The males have 4 to 6 horns, and they're kind of a smaller sheep. They have brown and white fur wool. So it's really very interesting. Now, the American breeds are closer to what the medieval standard would be. Then the ones in England are a little bigger. But I really enjoy spinning it. It's not super soft, so I wouldn't put it next to your skin. My next Arts and Science fleece to frock project is I've got a ton of Jacob, and I'm going to spin the white and the brown separately, and then I'm going to mix them together and get a gray, and I'm going to try and do a plaid. Hopefully. So for right now, I'm gonna spin them separately so you can see. The locks are, I would say, medium long-ish. That's the lock. So I'm gonna use the combs, because the combs are gonna give it that real fine definition. It's gonna be, it's not gonna be fuzzy at all. So if I was doing the color, it won't fuzz in between, and it'll be really crisp between the brown, the white, and the gray. You can use the cards, and especially if I was going to mix them all together and just do a gray, I'd probably do cards because it would be easier. So it all depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So here I have a big knot of vegetable matter. Especially now where we can't go to fiber festivals in person, we're kind of relegated to buying things on the internet, and it can be a little difficult. You don't know what you're getting. And even some of the fleeces that I bought when I first started buying fleeces, I didn't really know what I was looking for, and I bought some crummy fleeces. And now I kind of would just toss it. I wouldn't even waste my time trying to get everything out of it. This one is pretty clean. That was just one little spot that had some vegetable matter in it. And I've cleaned these all prior. So they're clean, they just haven't been combed or anything. So I'm just going to do a little bit. And so now we use the combs. And there's a lot more waste when you use combs than when you use cards, because the fibers that are too short are not going to go through the combs. And remember, I said when you're using the combs, you want to have all the fibers going in the same direction and being more uniform, so you have a lot more waste. Something to think about. What I do with my waste is I save it. I usually save it in a bag, and I use it for stuffing. I stuff pin cushions or any other kind of anything I would need to stuff with wool, so I don't like to waste. Okay, now the proper thing to do would be to pull this through a ditz and get a long roving, but we're just making some samples. I'm just showing you. So see, all this is waste. This stuff that stayed on the comb, waste. And then that's all short, fuzzy waste for another thing. Alright, I'm going to use a top whirl. I'm going to start a leader on my thigh. Alright, and then we're going to spin. So as I said, this is it's not overly fine. It's not super scratchy. I would put, if I was going to I want to make a dress out of it, it'll have a lining, or it might be the outer layer. It would be really nice for a cloak or for a hood. And yeah, it's pretty easy to spin. It's not too long, it's not slick. It's not overly curly. It's just, I really enjoy it. And the sheep, you get a chance, here in the modern world of New Jersey, there is a lot of people who breed Jacob sheep, and they're just so funny. The breeders I've talked to says it's kind of difficult because they have these crazy horns. They get caught on things and they can break them. So they have to be careful about their hay bales. They can't have anything with bars because they'll get caught in them. And they're really, because they're a primitive breed, they're very kind of independent. They lamb easily. They get into trouble. And they're smaller than what a modern sheep. And a lot of people think they're goats, especially with the horns. A lot of people don't really realize that they're sheep. They're just a really funky looking breed. Now, I've never had to edit a video before. If I can figure it out, I'll magically post a picture of the Jacob sheep that I have met, but we won't know until after I try and edit, if I can do that. I'm making no promises. Alright, so that's probably good enough for this. The interesting thing about the Jacob sheep is that where they have spots on them, and they have brown spots and white spots, and every sheep has a different color variation just like any other spotted animal, but where their hair is brown, their skin is brown underneath, and where their fur is white, their skin is white underneath. So it's really interesting. And so I'll just put a little knot in this, and I'll apply it together. There we go. So this is a super easy beginner wool. Not as soft as a merino or a Shetland, but still enjoyable. So there's the white, and now we're going to do the brown. Now, in the research that I've done, they've said that the brown and the white can have a different coarseness. It's not that I've noticed. It could be, but I don't think it varies greatly. I certainly haven't seen the difference in anything that I've knitted or woven with it. But I also haven't looked at it under a microscope, so. It's just such a great color brown. Okay. And they make combs that are bigger than this, but I don't do a lot of processing. And usually, if I have, like, for this dress that I'm going to make, it's a lot of fiber, but I'm not going to comb it all at once. So I'll just comb up some, spin some, comb up some, spin some. What I have done is, because I bought about 5 or 6 different fleeces, I did mix the fleeces up so that it's not, I made that mistake before where I spun one fleece, spun another fleece, spun a third fleece, and then the yarns don't match because no fleece is exactly like another one. So, learned my lesson, and now I have them all mixed up, so at least I don't have to worry about that. Probably if I wanted to be really consistent, you could do all the processing ahead of time, but that's not the way my brain will work. Okay, this is good enough. This is, you probably can't see, but it's real nice and smooth and silky. So here I have a little bit more waste. Alright. That's about it. Again, I'll start the leader on my thigh. There's some white in there. It's all good, all good. What you can also do, there's so many, when you have 2 colors on the same fleece, there's so many things you can do. You can do brown, white and gray. You can do it all gray. You can do like a barber pole. You can have one single that's brown and one single that's white, and then ply it together and you'd have like a striped. So it's a lot of variations without ever having to dye anything. I really enjoy naturally colored sheep, and it's a shame because it's getting more and more rare that we have modern, anything but white. So I very much encourage you to support your local shepherds that are breeding these interesting sheep and keeping these breeds alive. Jacob sheep are considered rare, and like I said, you wouldn't know it from where I live. If I go, we have a local fiber festival every year in September, and there are tons of Jacobs. So for me, I'm lucky, but that's just like a medieval person. They had sheep, and whatever sheep was their local sheep, that's what they had, and that's what they used. They didn't have access like we do to mail away, or, I guess if they went to a festival, they could do it, traders, but mostly you're going to use what you have, the raw materials that you have available to you locally. Okay. Let's just ply this up. Alrighty. So there we have our brown and our white from the same sheep. How cool is that, right? So I definitely, if you have a chance to get your hands on some Jacob, I would definitely recommend it. So the first time I tried to make a dress from fiber, I used the black Welsh. And the beautiful thing, the color. This is all about the color. Remember how I said earlier that there's some characteristic of the sheep that kept it from being changed over the years. For this, it was the color. This is the natural color of the sheep. It is, I'll put it against the white, it is very dark, almost black. And the great thing about this sheep is even as the sheep ages, the hair doesn't get lighter. Most sheep, that's the way it is. Just like, I don't know if you've ever had a dog that had black hair, as it gets older, it gets gray, just like humans. But that doesn't happen with the sheep. It doesn't fade in the sun. So in medieval period, they didn't have synthetic dyes. A black dye wouldn't last very long. Eventually it's going to fade. So this sheep was people would pay top dollar for this color. Again, not soft like what we're used to, and it has I find it has a lot of lanolin, which is kind of nice. So this is a hard wearing wool. Remember how I said I made my mistakes? Well, this was one of the ones where I made the mistake, is I bought one fleece, spun it, it was a real garbage fleece. Then I got another one, spun that, it was nicer, and it didn't match. So I have a nice hood now. Now, you could, this is shorter than that Jacob that I had. You could still comb this. You could also card it. I'm just going to, this is really, I kind of don't need to do either. This is really a nice fleece. I think I might just flick it a little. And I'm not going to flick it on the table. You're not really going to see it. I'm just going to try and spread out the edges. I did a little bit of spreading. I manhandle my wool a lot before I actually spin it. I even kind of do some pre-drafting before I start spinning, because, well, you know, why not? And I mean, there are people who have researched more into period styles of how they spun and how they would hold their spindle. I have not gotten into that. I've really just been spinning for effect. I have done in my projects, like for when I was trying to make the dress, I didn't do it all on the drop spindle. I did it on my wheel, which isn't period, but what I did do is I spun both on the spindle and on the wheel, and I didn't find, for me, you could tell which one was which was spun which way. I know I've spun for longer on just the drop spindle, and I spin more often on the drop spindle. I'm actually more comfortable, and I think my spinning is a little better on the drop spindle than it is on the wheel. But when you have 5 pounds of wool to spin, it's just not practical for me to do it all on the drop spindle. But that's for you to decide. So this is just beautiful. Now this is a little bit crimpier than the Jacob. So I feel like my wool is not as smooth. I also didn't comb it, so that also has an effect on it. I don't think I definitely can't get it as fine as I could with a Shetland. But it's fine enough for what I want. And it's really strong. And these sheep in person are a little bit bigger than the Jacob. And the Jacob sheep are kind of thin. These are more like a blocky sheep, but hard to find. Not a lot of sheep in North America. Not a lot of breeders breed Black Welsh. Obviously, these are from Wales in the mountains, and they're black. Now, you know what? In fact, I did meet a breeder when I was at the New York Sheep and Wool Festival, and they breed them for meat. They don't use the wool, and I was like, what? She said that she was thinking about getting into selling the wool, but the problem is if they're not taking care of the fleece, it's difficult for a hand spinner because they don't keep the grass out of them. A lot of breeders, if they're going to sell the wool, they'll put coats on their sheep to try and keep all the dirt and the grass and the burrs out of them, especially for a sheep that's lower to the ground. But so that's, you know, my nice strong Black Welsh mountain sheep. Another one I highly recommend. Soye is the oldest breed that we know of. This is an Iron Age sheep. It is very primitive. So primitive they they shed their wool. So these sheep don't need to be shorn. They kind of rub up against things and it falls off. They shed it because before sheep were domesticated, they didn't have somebody to cut their hair off. So they think that this is one of the first domesticated sheep. Also, not too many breeders. I happened to find a breeder years ago, and I was so happy at the Fiber Festival that I found them, and then their website's down. I can't find them anymore. So I bought, I think like a pound of the wool, sight unseen. It's hard for me to spin. it is small. It's kind of like cotton size, and you'll recall I'm not so great at spinning cotton. And it's not, this is because it wasn't shorn off, they're all different lengths. It's really way too short to put through the combs. So the only thing to do is card. I tried, I bought so much, thought I would do a big project. I can't do it. Now my apprentice sister took this and spun it up really nice. So your mileage may vary. But again, a hard sheep to find. Not a lot of people breed it. It's not something that is going to be, I think, sought after by hand spinners. It's kind of more of a novelty. But I was really happy to find them because they're like, I saw one when I first started the breed study. I saw them in the Maryland Sheep and Wool Festival. I mean, it's even hard to card these. It's just, but they weren't selling the wool. They were just there for the breed show. I looked. They weren't selling them. And then I spent many years after that trying to track them down again. So I have seen them. Maybe when I go back to the New York Sheep and Wool Festival, I'll be able to see them. I'll find them again. Maybe it's just that their website's down. But the sheep was, it was a big ram. And because he had been bottle fed since the time he was a baby, I was able to pet him, and he had enormous horns, and I even got to pet them, and he let me do it. It's great. It's great. Okay. Alright. So, because this is short, but it's wool, it's stronger than cotton, I probably could, and I have, use the top or bottom whirl. But maybe I'll use the supported this time. Just like I did the cotton, and see how that goes for me. So, I mean, this is, it's just a little fuzzy ball now. Let me start a leader. This is maybe what if my long draw was better, maybe that's the way to do it. I mean, this is lumpy and bumpy. I'm getting it though. And not everything has to be beautiful. You know, sometimes it looks more artsy and people will know it's handmade. Sometimes if it looks too good, people don't know you made it. So, you know, it could be a design choice. It is a bouncy yarn though. And this would certainly keep you warm if you got to it. So not too bad. Not my best yarn. But it's soye. And it's fun for me to spin different yarns. So I'm not always trying to do the most beautiful yarn. That's not what this is about. This is about experiencing it. I mean, maybe I'll use the locks, like felt locks into something and make it a lining to something. So there's a nice fuzzy yarn. Where are my Vikings at? Icelandic wool come from Iceland. Big surprise. So, the Vikings, when they were up in their Viking area, I don't know a lot about Vikings, but I do know that when they brought their sheep, they then made a law that you couldn't mix them with any other sheep because it was cold. It was hard for them to live, and if they mixed any other sheep breeds, it just didn't, the sheep weren't hardy enough. So the Icelandic sheep from Iceland are pretty much the most genetically similar to what they had back in the day. So my son has a Viking persona. I bought a whole bunch of Icelandic wool. I'm going to make him hopefully some leg wraps. And this is a rare that usually you have a breed of sheep that you use for meat and one that you use for wool, but because they only have this breed, this was their meat, this was their wool, and this was their milk. So this is very interesting. It's almost like hair. It's a very hairy sheep. It's not very soft. It's got a nice long, I'd say long. It's longer than so far the Jacob. So I would comb it. I wouldn't card it. I guess you could, but I would probably comb this more. And this, because it's not very curly or crimpy, it gives you a nice kind of luster to the finished yarn. And I've gotten, I think there's only like 3 main colors. I've gotten like a brown, pretty dark brown, and then kind of like a brown, almost like a henna colored. There might be some more colors. This is a little bit easier to find. And of course this was from, I bought this at the Maryland Sheep and Wool Festival, so this is an American sheep. It's not from Iceland, but they were showing and selling the fleece, so you would think they're trying to keep to the standard. My video cut out while I was spinning the Icelandic and I didn't realize it. I had 2 more sheep that I spun and was talking to myself, so I don't know really what happened. This was the first time that I've done a video with my camera and this microphone, and this is the first time that I've edited a video, as you can probably tell from my choppy edits. But hopefully that you found some useful information in this. And I had to change the class a little bit from what it usually is. It's usually a hands-on conversation, and it just kind of happens, and it's usually a lot of fun. So hopefully it won't be too long before we can get back to the way things are normally done, and I hope that everyone stays happy and healthy, and we're all together next year at Pensick, and hopefully we'll get to spin together at some time. But until then, find some unique fibers to spin and experience it, and keep yourself safe and happy, and be kind to each other. Thank you.